So now, in
definitely
the
cool.
future sense, where do you see cloud security is going to go? Like, what do you see? What do you think is going to be the biggest threat in the next 3 to 5 years? And how can
Hmm.
people start preparing for that now?
Well, I mean, people I think are the biggest threat still. But I guess what I see, and this is like the thing that scares me the most, is this. How do I say this? Organizations that are still using kind of somewhat legacy style review processes
Hmm.
in the cloud. The kind
Okay.
of, and I think the inability to accelerate their adoption is the problem. And the other thing that I'm seeing, and this is where like I talk to a lot of like organizations, there's a learning curve. And I think where the biggest problems is going to come is that there are people, and we use a lot of people use the console. I use the console sometimes when I'm lazy,
Yeah.
that are just console jockeys, and they will not write a line of code, will not do anything. And I think that is going to be the fear to me. Like, I'm basically afraid that someone's going to type something into chat GPT because they don't know how to do something. It's going to give
Yep.
them some code. They're going to execute it, and they're not actually going to know what their code did in their environment because they always use
Oh
the
yeah.
console. And it's going to
It's
like
I think it's
blow
funny that you
stuff
say
up.
that because I think you just touched on something I've thought about for a while now. So remember, like there was like Google poisoning, where basically you go out and just make a bunch of garbage spam sites that all have the
Yeah.
same link, they're the same type of bogus article or bogus statement that you want to be true, and then Google just because it's out there and so prolific, then Google just says, "Oh, this must be true," and ranks it high. And someone did it as a joke. I forget what it was back in the day, but they basically said like George Washington wasn't the first president or something, and it became truth because just so many sites said so. And ChatGPT and all these AI models are just learning off data that's out there. So I think AI poisoning is going to be something that's going to be the next on the radar that's no one's even talking about right now, is just poisoning the data sets that are out there for these AI models to learn from. So now all of a sudden you're like, hey, look, if I feed it all this misinformation, AI is going to dump it out. People are idiots. They're just going to copy and paste it like you're saying and not run it at all. And all of a sudden this code is going to have some weird little injection in there that you don't even know about, import some library that's got some vulnerability that's known and was promoted on
It's
purpose. This way it gets plastered everywhere, and now they have a bot that can just go around and do whatever they want,
yeah.
and be as malicious as hell.
Yeah, and I'm seeing it. Like, you see, like, I love that, VS Code has the autopilot or whatever to help you code out. But I mean, it's just, yeah. And but I've seen good uses of it too. I've seen
Yep.
a lot of like error messages, like using AI to interpret error messages that you get from Java. Those would also be helpful.
Yeah.
And then telling you how to mitigate them. One of the guys I work with did a demo of that in it. But yeah, I'm afraid that a lot of people don't want to commit to learn it and want to bring their legacy practices. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's kind of like when we went from mainframe to distributed, like we
Hmm.
had to change a lot of things. And I think this is honestly, to me, the cloud is going back to mainframe. And I think as identity folks, it's actually kind of soothing,
Okay.
because mainframe was like a monolith, but it gave you a universal centralized identity control, which the cloud does, right? It tells you the language. We had two, RACF or TSS, but you got forced to work in this model with these restrictions, with these controls. And I think there's something as an identity person you can kind of quickly glom onto as like, oh, this is great. I can actually really control this and really scope it the way I've always wanted to. Whereas like a distributed system, it's like, please, I mean, how many like random authorization tools products work, like Axiomatics and Bitku or whatever,
Hmm.
that never just took off. So every
Yeah.
app wrote their own, and you rolled it in. So I think it's going to be an interesting
So
space with the
do you
changes.
think the future is going to be more of the same of consolidated single source of identity, or do you think we're going to move more towards decentralized self-sovereign identity?
I probably would say a bit more of the centralized I'd say it's going to be more of the distributed sovereign identity.
Okay.
But I think we're going to start to see. I mean, this is unrelated to I mean, this is not outside of Oracle's opinion, but I honestly think that eventually governments are going to step up in the identity space.
Okay.
You
How
know,
so?
well, I mean, and I think
What
like if you
scary
think
way? What
about,
do I need to be paranoid about?
well, I don't know about scary, but here's the biggest thing, right? Like, think about banking, right?
Hmm.
Every bank decides to maintain a record of me, and at the end of the day, probably the only thing that they got right all the time, because they had to run my credit check, was my social security number. And,
Yep.
they might have like my middle initial, or they might have my middle name, depending on what's there. I think the government could kind of resolve that, like the US Postal Service being a universal identity provider. Because I think there's like a lot of stuff that we do with the government where we have to interact with them that it's really hard for them to identify you. So I would really like them to step up in the digital identity space. And this isn't for enterprise. This is for like just
Personal use,
operating in, yeah, personal use,
like
and also
revamp
giving it,
SSN altogether. Like, 'cause that you can't
yeah,
change it if it gets jacked, then you're screwed for life. Like that's ridiculous. That's so antiquated.
yeah. I would like, public private key infrastructure or something like that. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's the right approach, but something where, I have this is me, I keep it with me, and it validates me. And I think it makes it easier then for like, banks, they don't have to hold SSN anymore, right? If they need to
yep,
go pull it. And then I can control who has access to it. I can dynamically generate these off of my shared key. I can create
yep,
my own keychain to manage it. And
yeah,
I have more say over not only just my identity, but my data then too. So I think I'd like to see us go there. I'd like to see I'd like to see Apple win in a way, like, all right, our phone is our identity, which also scares me when someone steals my phone or if I lose it or if I forget it. But, that's probably more me than, my driver's license number. Um,
yeah. Definitely a lot
so
more personal.
yeah. I don't know about organizations though. I think, my view on identities for organizations is eventually Google will win.